Imagine sitting in the front row of your sister's wedding. The flowers are perfect. The music is exactly right. The man she loves is standing at the altar looking at her like she is the only person in the world. And you are there in your bridesmaid dress, holding your bouquet, genuinely happy for her when you pick up the wedding program sitting on the chair beside you. You read it the way anyone reads a wedding program, casually, half paying attention, and then your eyes land on a name and a date of birth. And everything, every small confusion, every unexplained inconsistency, every quiet moment over 11 years where something felt slightly wrong, but you could never say exactly why, collapses into a single, devastating point of clarity. The name on that program is yours, your full legal name, your birthday, your identity. Printed on 500 cards, placed on 500 chairs, in a room full of people who have no idea that the bride standing at that altar has been living as her sister for over a decade. This is the story of Danielle Washington, and it is one of the most calculated, most personal, and most quietly devastating betrayals we have ever covered on this channel. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And please hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stay with me, because this story is going to take you somewhere you were not expecting. Danielle Marie Washington was born on July 14, 1985, in Columbus, Ohio, the first child of Robert and Gloria Washington. Robert was a postal worker, 31 years of service, same route, same quiet dedication, the kind of man who showed up for everything without making a production of it. Gloria was a school administrator who ran her building with calm authority and came home every evening and ran her household the same way. They were not wealthy, but they were present, and they were consistent, and in a world that makes both of those things harder than they should be, Robert and Gloria Washington had created something genuinely rare. A home where their children felt safe and seen, and completely certain that they were loved. Danielle was the kind of firstborn that parents quietly exhale about. She was responsible before she was asked to be. She looked after her younger siblings without being told. She got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and had a quality of self-possession that adults noticed and trusted immediately. By high school, she already knew she wanted to work in healthcare administration. She was drawn to systems, to organization, to the logic of how large institutions either serve people well or fail them entirely. She was methodical and patient, and she gave of herself freely, without keeping any kind of internal score. People loved her for that. Her family leaned on that. And Danielle, because she was Danielle, never once made anyone feel like a burden for doing so. Renee Antoinette Washington was born 4 years later, in 1989. And from the very beginning, the two sisters were different in ways that went beneath personality into something more fundamental. Where Danielle was steady, Renee was electric. Where Danielle was content to build slowly and trust the process, Renee felt the gap between where she was and where she wanted to be as a constant low-grade discomfort that she could never fully shake. She was charming and quick and socially brilliant, the kind of person who could walk into any room and within 20 minutes identify every important relationship in it and know exactly what to say to each person. She was funny and warm, and people gravitated toward her naturally. But underneath all of that brightness was an insecurity so deep and so old that Renee had stopped being able to distinguish it from her own personality. She did not experience it as insecurity. She experienced it as hunger, a constant, unnamed hunger for something she could never quite reach. And growing up as the younger sister of Danielle Washington made that hunger harder to live with, not easier. Every teacher Renee sat in front of had already taught Danielle. Every employer she approached in Columbus already knew the Washington name through her sister's reputation. Every space she entered, Danielle had already occupied and left a positive impression in. Renee was brilliant, genuinely, measurably brilliant, but her gifts were different from Danielle's, and she had never been given the language or the framework to value them on their own terms. She only ever measured them against her sister. And by that measurement, which was always the wrong measurement, she always came up short. She never said this to Danielle. Danielle, who would have dismantled that belief immediately and lovingly, never knew it existed. Renee kept it close and private and let it grow. Into this family dynamic, at a neighborhood cookout in the summer of 2010, walked a white man named Todd Briggs. Todd was 27, from Gahanna, a suburb of Columbus with a particular demographic character that anyone from that city would recognize. And he had the specific unearned confidence of someone who had moved through the world without ever being seriously challenged by it. He was good-looking in a conventional way, and he was attentive when he wanted to be, and he had resources that felt significant to a 21-year-old woman who had been scraping towards stability her entire adult life. He met both sisters that afternoon. He noticed Danielle first. Most people did. But Danielle was focused, unavailable in her energy, and completely uninterested in him, specifically in the way that tends to make certain men more persistent rather than less. When it became clear that Danielle was not the direction this was going, Todd turned his attention to Renee. And Renee, who had spent her entire life feeling like the runner-up in a competition she had not entered, felt something move inside her when this man chose her. When he looked at her, specifically and deliberately, and decided she was worth pursuing. His mother was a woman named Sandra Briggs, and Sandra had opinions about her son's relationship from the moment she learned the particulars of it. She never said anything that could be directly quoted and cleanly condemned. She was too careful for that, but she asked questions about Renee's family background and career prospects and financial situation with a warmth in her voice that did not match the temperature of the inquiry. She made comments at family dinners that landed in a specific way and then dissolved before anyone could address them directly. She compared Renee, always favorably on the surface, always with an undertone that landed differently, to the wives and girlfriends of Todd's white friends and cousins. And Renee absorbed every one of those interactions and filed them away and smiled, and said the right things and went home and felt the slow accumulation of them pressing against the same wound that had been open since childhood. The wound that said she was not quite enough, that she needed to be more, that she needed to be better, that she needed to be different from what she actually was. That wound is where the theft was born, not in greed, though greed became part of it, not in carelessness, it was anything but careless. It was born in the specific, aching desperation of a woman who believed, on some deep and unexamined level, that her own identity was not sufficient to build the life she wanted, and that her sister's was. It started in the spring of 2010, when Renee was 21 years old and had applied for an apartment in a Columbus neighborhood she could not quite afford on her entry-level income. Her credit history was thin in the way that young people's credit histories are when nobody has taught them how to build one early. Her income documentation was borderline. The application was denied. And in the week after that denial, Renee sat with a feeling she had been sitting with her whole life, the feeling of a door being closed in her face, and she made a decision she would later tell investigators she thought of as temporary. She used Danielle's social security number on a second application at a different property management company. Danielle's credit was excellent. Danielle had been building it carefully since she was 18, exactly as their father had advised. The application was approved within 4 days. Renee moved in the following month, and nothing happened. No phone call, no letter, no knock on the door, just silence. And that silence was the most dangerous thing that could have happened because it taught Renee the lesson that would define the next 11 years of her life. It taught her that she could do this. And that Danielle, 40 minutes away, busy and trusting and completely without suspicion, would not know. The expansion was gradual, and then it was not gradual at all. A credit card application in 2011 using Danielle's social security number, approved, a $3,000 limit, used carefully and never missed a payment because Renee was not reckless. She was strategic. A car loan in 2012, a manageable amount, payments made on time. A second credit card in 2013 with a higher limit. A medical billing account in 2014. And then the one that crossed a line that the others had approached but not yet reached. A professional certification in healthcare administration, submitted in 2015 under Danielle's name and credentials. After Renee's own application had been flagged due to a background irregularity she had never disclosed to anyone. That certification got Renee a job at a mid-size healthcare company in Columbus. $61,000 a year, benefits, a title. A career that she was genuinely good at, in a field she was genuinely suited for, built entirely on a foundation that belonged to someone else. By 2016, Renee Washington was living a professional and financial life almost entirely constructed on her sister's identity. And the real Danielle Washington, who called Renee every Sunday, who showed up for birthdays and holidays and hard moments, who had once sat with her sister for an entire afternoon walking her through the steps of building credit because she wanted Renee to have every advantage she had worked for herself, was beginning to notice things. A credit inquiry she had not initiated, flagged on a monitoring alert she had set up through her bank. A piece of mail referencing an account number she did not recognize. A moment at a bank branch in 2016 when a customer service representative glanced at her identification and then at their screen and held that glance a half-second too long before composing their expression into something professional and neutral. Danielle called the credit bureaus. She filed 2 disputes. Both were resolved without revealing the full architecture of what was happening, because Renee, who was monitoring Danielle's credit profile with the same diligence she applied to everything she did, was positioned to respond to each inquiry just quickly enough to keep the picture incomplete. And then there was Marcus. Their brother Marcus Washington was 31 years old in 2016 and had been helping Danielle move apartments on a Saturday afternoon when he came across something that stopped him. A piece of mail addressed to Danielle at an address that was not hers, and had never been a building across town that he happened to know Renee had lived in several years earlier. He had asked Renee about it quietly, at a family barbecue 2 weeks later, away from everyone else. And Renee had looked her brother in the eye and told him a story. Not a lie constructed from nothing. Those are the easiest lies to eventually see through. A lie woven through with just enough truth to hold. She told him she had used Danielle's name once, on one apartment application, years ago, when she was broke and desperate and had no other options. She told him it was done, it was corrected, and that telling Danielle now would only hurt her unnecessarily for something that was already in the past. And then she cried. Real tears, genuine distress, the specific vulnerability of someone confessing just enough to be believed. Marcus had been 29 years old. He had loved both of his sisters with his whole heart. He had looked at Renee crying and made the decision that felt, in that moment, like mercy. He stayed silent, and that silence would cost him something he did not yet know he had to lose. Todd proposed to Renee in March of 2020. A nice ring, a nice restaurant, a proposal that Sandra Briggs photographed from across the room because she had known it was coming and wanted to document the moment her son chose his future. Renee said yes. And in the weeks that followed, as they began planning the wedding, as the venue was booked and the invitations were designed and the guest list was assembled, Renee made the decision that would eventually bring 11 years of carefully maintained deception to a complete and public end. She decided to get married under Danielle's name, not her own, Danielle's. Because the financial and professional life she had built, the life that the Briggs family had accepted and respected and welcomed into their home, was registered and documented and verifiable under Danielle Marie Washington. And Renee could not figure out how to become herself again without dismantling everything. So instead she went further in. She gave the venue her full legal name as Danielle Marie Washington, born July 14th, 1985. She signed the marriage license application that way. She submitted identification documentation that way. And 500 wedding programs were printed with that name on them. 500 programs placed on 500 chairs in a venue in a suburb of Columbus on a Saturday in September 2021. Danielle had been asked to be maid of honor. She had said yes immediately, without hesitation, because that is who Danielle Washington was. She had helped plan the wedding. She had driven 40 minutes every weekend for months to go to venues and florists and dress fittings. She had written a speech. She had altered her own bridesmaid dress by hand because the sizing was slightly off and she wanted it to be perfect. She was sitting in the front row on the bride's side on that September afternoon, holding white roses and feeling, beneath her genuine happiness for her sister, a quiet and sourceless unease that she could not locate or explain. The processional began. The music played. Renee came down the aisle looking extraordinary, and Todd looked at her the way grooms are supposed to look, and Sandra Briggs dabbed her eyes in the front row on the other side, and everything was exactly as a wedding is supposed to be. Danielle picked up the program during the opening remarks. She read it the way you read something in a moment like that, half present, half watching the ceremony, letting her eyes move across the page without much intention. And then her eyes found the name. Danielle Marie Washington, born July 14th, 1985. She read it twice. She looked up at her sister standing at the altar. She looked back down at the program. And she felt the specific, terrible stillness that comes when something enormous reveals itself all at once. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, absolute certainty of a key turning in a lock. She sat through the entire ceremony, 47 minutes. She held her bouquet and she watched her sister exchange vows, and she did not move and she did not speak and she did not cry. The wedding photographer, reviewing his shots later, would note that in almost every photograph from the ceremony, the maid of honor's face carried an expression he struggled to describe. Not sad exactly, not angry. Something more like a person watching, something end in slow motion, while everyone around them believes it is just beginning. At the reception, Danielle excused herself to the restroom and instead found a quiet corridor near the venue's back entrance. She called her bank from her cell phone and asked them to run a full account summary against her social security number and read her every credit account currently associated with her identity. The representative took several minutes, and then she began reading. Accounts Danielle had never opened, balances she had never carried, addresses she had never lived at. A car loan from 2012, paid off, that she had never taken. A professional certification in healthcare administration that had been earned in 2015 under her name at an institution she had never attended. A rental history spanning 9 years at 4 separate properties she had never set foot in. Danielle listened to every item without saying a single word. When the representative finished, she thanked her, ended the call, and stood alone in that corridor for 6 minutes. Then she smoothed her dress, walked back into the reception, found her brother Marcus standing near the bar, and pulled him by the arm to a quiet corner of the room. She showed him the wedding program. She told him what the bank had just told her. And Marcus Washington looked at his sister, his oldest sister, who had spent her entire life being the most reliable person in every room she ever occupied, and his face did something she had never seen it do before. It collapsed, not dramatically. Just quietly, completely, in the way that faces do when a person realizes that the thing they chose to protect someone from has instead grown into something they never imagined. He said, "Danny, I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." And he told her about 2016, about the piece of mail, about the conversation at the barbecue, about the decision he had made to believe Renee and stay quiet. He told her all of it, standing in the corner of his sister's wedding reception while their sister danced with her new husband 20 feet away. When he finished, Danielle looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Did you actually think it was just once?" And Marcus had no answer, because the truth was that he had not let himself think about it carefully enough to know. Danielle made 3 calls that evening before she went home. The first was to the Federal Trade Commission Identity Theft Reporting Line. The second was to the Social Security Administration Fraud Division. The third was to a woman named Patricia Cole, a Columbus-based attorney with 20 years of financial fraud litigation experience, whose name Danielle had been given by a colleague 2 years earlier in an entirely different context, and had saved in her phone without ever expecting to need. Patricia answered on the 4th ring. Danielle spoke for 12 minutes without stopping. When she finished, Patricia said, "Come to my office Monday morning. Bring everything you told me and anything else you can find. We are going to build this case correctly, and we are going to build it completely." Danielle said she would be there. Then she called her mother. Gloria Washington listened to her eldest daughter tell her everything without interrupting once. When Danielle finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then Gloria said, in a voice that was very quiet and very controlled in the way that voices are when the person speaking them is holding something enormous with both hands, "Tell me everything, from the very beginning. Leave nothing out," Danielle told her, and Gloria listened. And what Gloria said after that, and what she chose to do with what she knew, she has kept entirely private. Some things belong to a mother and her children, even when the rest of the story is already in a federal file. The investigation took 8 months. Patricia Cole and her team worked methodically through every account, every transaction, every document, every signature. What they built was a federal complaint over 200 pages long that documented 14 separate fraudulent accounts across 11 years. A total of $230,000 in debt accumulated under Danielle's name, and the professional certification that had been used to secure a $61,000 a year position Renee had held for 4 years. The career Renee had been proud of, the professional reputation she had genuinely earned through her own competence and hard work, had been accessed through a door that was not hers to open. And that combination, real ability used through fraudulent access, was treated by federal prosecutors as more serious, not less, because it demonstrated sustained and deliberate intent over a significant period of time. Todd Briggs was deposed. His attorney was present for every session, and his answers were careful and considered in the way that answers are when someone has been very thoroughly prepared. But the text messages recovered from his phone through legal discovery told a different story. They established that Todd had known about at minimum 3 of the fraudulent accounts and had actively benefited from 2 of them, including the car loan from 2012, which had been used to purchase a vehicle that Todd drove for 4 years. His attorney negotiated aggressively. The final outcome for Todd included a substantial federal fine, 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory financial fraud counseling, and the complete end of a career in financial services he had been building for the better part of a decade. The marriage, which had lasted exactly 11 days before the federal investigation formally commenced, was annulled in November 2021. Sandra Briggs, whose consistent and pointed messaging about Renee's inadequacy had been one of the pressures that pushed Renee toward constructing a fraudulent identity in the first place, issued no public statement. She did not need to. The situation had already said everything that needed to be said about the cost of making someone feel like they are not enough exactly as they are. Renee Washington entered a guilty plea in the spring of 2022 to federal identity theft, wire fraud, and fraudulent misrepresentation of professional credentials. The sentencing took place on a Tuesday morning in April 2022 in a federal courtroom in Columbus. Danielle was present. She sat in the gallery, and she watched her sister stand before the judge, and she kept her face completely still. She had submitted a written victim impact statement rather than speaking in person, 3 paragraphs that her attorney read into the official record. The first paragraph described the financial damage. The second described the professional damage. The director-level promotion Danielle had been passed over for twice because the fraudulent accounts attached to her social security number had generated red flags in background checks she had never been able to explain or resolve. The third paragraph said, "I do not hate my sister. I am not certain I am capable of that, but I want her to understand what she actually took from me. Not the credit score, and not the money, and not the years I spent trying to understand why small things did not add up. What she took from me was the ability to trust the one relationship in my life I never thought I needed to question. I carried that trust like it was the most valuable thing I owned. Because it was. I hope she understands that. I hope she thinks about it every single day." The judge sentenced Renee to 4 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution to Danielle, a figure that, including legal costs and accumulated interest, exceeded $300,000. Before announcing the sentence, the judge made a statement that was later reported widely. She said that what distinguished this case from other identity fraud cases was not the financial scale, though that was significant, but the nature of the relationship that had been exploited. She said that Danielle Washington had spent 11 years being systematically stolen from by the person she was most actively trying to protect and support. She said that the trust between siblings is among the most fundamental bonds a person carries through their life, and that the sustained, deliberate exploitation of that bond represented a harm that the court took seriously beyond the dollars and the documents. The restitution payments began in 2023. Danielle used the first significant disbursement to retire every fraudulent debt that remained associated with her credit profile, and to fund the retainer for a credit restoration specialist who spent 14 months working with the 3 major bureaus to formally clear and rebuild her financial record. By the end of 2023, her credit profile had been completely restored. In January 2024, she was considered for the director-level position at her healthcare administration company that she had been passed over for twice before. This time there were no red flags in her background check. This time the file was clean. She was offered the position on a Wednesday afternoon, and she accepted it before the end of the call. She bought a house in Columbus in the spring of 2024. Her name on the mortgage, her credit, her history. Her life, finally, without qualification, entirely and unambiguously her own. Marcus cooperated fully with federal investigators. He provided a complete written statement and attended every court date. His cooperation was noted in the record and ultimately meant he faced no charges, though the decision about whether he should have faced any was not a simple one, and the federal prosecutors did not make it lightly. His relationship with Danielle took time, honest, uncomfortable, sometimes painful time, to rebuild. But it was rebuilt. Because Danielle Washington, who had survived 11 years of invisible theft and come out the other side with her character intact, understood something that the people who had underestimated her never did. She understood the difference between someone who had made a terrible choice under pressure they had not managed well and someone who was beyond repair. She knew which category her brother fell into, and she made her decision accordingly. That is not weakness. That is the specific, hard-won wisdom of a woman who has looked at the full cost of broken trust and still chosen, deliberately and with open eyes, to invest in the people worth rebuilding with. Renee Washington has served her sentence. Danielle has not spoken publicly about whether they have been in contact. That is her private business, and it will remain so. What Danielle has spoken about, in a brief statement released through Patricia Cole's office in early 2024, is what she wants people to take from her story. She said, "Pay attention to the small things that do not add up. Not because the people around you are necessarily deceiving you, but because you deserve to know the full truth of your own life. You deserve to know what is yours. Your name, your history, your credit, your record, these things are not small. They are the infrastructure of your existence. Protect them. And if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Look more closely. You are allowed to know." So here is the question I want to leave you with today, and I mean this genuinely. I want you to sit with it before you answer in the comments. If you were Danielle, sitting in that front row in your bridesmaid dress, and you picked up that wedding program and saw your own name printed on it, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have stood up right then? Would you have waited until it was over? Would you have walked out of the building entirely? Or would you have done what she did, sat through every minute of that ceremony in complete silence, made your calls at the reception, and trusted the process to deliver the outcome that the evidence demanded? Tell me below, because I read every single comment and this one matters. Drop the word sisters in the comments if you made it all the way to the end of this video. I want to see you. And if this story moved you, share it. There is someone in your life who needs to hear it. Next week, we are covering the story of a woman who discovered her husband had been sending money to a secret second family for 9 years. And the moment she found out the full truth, she was sitting across from him signing their mortgage together. Subscribe. You do not want to miss that one.